Prior to Election Day, which was June 2nd, 2026 here in Los Angeles, I used to think a cynic was a person who thought that everything was going to go wrong and there was hardly any point in trying. But after that election, I realized, no. Now, the real cynic is the person who just doesn't care anymore. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. As you probably know by now, the election for mayor of Los Angeles, which was a runoff election, if any one of the three leading candidates had a clear majority, they would have simply gone on to be the next mayor. But Karen Bass, the first mayor in 20 years to not win on a primary, finished Election Day ahead by a couple of points. And Spencer Pratt, who I was very fond of, and most people who don't like the idea of your city burning down because there's no water in the reservoirs that we've already been taxed for, was in a very commanding second place with something like an 8-point lead over the number third character. Well, as it turns out, California didn't have the vote count by the end of that day, and they didn't have it by the end of the day after that either, and they didn't have it at the end of the day after that either, and it took a week for them to finally get everything together, at which point we found out that no, it's not going to be Karen Bass versus the reform candidate of Spencer Pratt. It's going to be Karen Bass versus her longtime associate and protege, Miss Rahman. I'm just going to say this one time, just so you understand where I'm coming from on this. I believe that election was stolen, and I don't think there's any question about it. And here's my evidence, okay? This is not just because we didn't win. I understand the votes come in late and mail votes and progressive districts, all of this. But after the election was over, Election Day was over, not only did Rahman realize how far she was behind Pratt and give a concession speech during which she cried, but when the vote counting continued after Election Day, what we found was that Bass's count was flatlined, but Rahman's count was continuing to climb. They're both progressive politicians. Bass was more popular than Rahman on Election Day. Her number should have been higher. So to me, that's just prima facie evidence that the whole thing was rigged. But this comes back to the cynicism thing, guys. I don't know what level of punishment it's going to take, Steve. We'll start with you. Okay. I don't know how much beatings are going to have to continue until the morale improves around here, but I do know that on Election Day, when I was there, everybody was excited about the idea that this guy was going to not win today, but gain enough traction so that he'd have an actual honest chance 4 or 5 months to actually make a difference in this city. And we watched that get taken away from us, and nobody was surprised. That's the thing. When I found out it happened, Steve, when I found out it happened, I put a lot of work into this for reasons I'll get to on the close, on the Spencer Pratt thing. But when it happened, I was not nearly as upset as I thought I was going to be, because I really just said to myself, well, what did you expect in this town? What did you expect in a town that spends $1 billion a year or whatever on homelessness and hasn't built a single shelter yet?
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. I mean...
That's it. That's the end of the show right there. That's all we need.
Yeah, I would like to go on just a little bit. It comes down to trust, and trust has been broken. And once that's gone, how do you get it back? It's broken here in Colorado, too. We don't have the counting issues you do, but we have in Jenna Griswold a Secretary of State who is the worst partisan hack, perhaps, in the country. I won't go off on that tangent because I want to talk about how they broke trust here. In the olden days, when Colorado was still a competitive state, I'm talking, just 10 years ago, 12 years ago maybe now, on Election Day, I would go to my polling place. It's at my little city hall, my little town, and I would present my ID. They would compare that to the name and address in the ledger. I would sign my name next to that entry on the ledger. So they know I'm me. They know they're giving the ballot to the right person. I see that my signature is next to my name in the ledger so that nobody else can try and get another ballot claiming to be me. I would take my ballot in the little privacy envelope it came in, and I would go to my little booth, and I would vote for all the things I was going to, I would vote for the people I was going to vote for, and then I would vote against every single measure. or at least 99 out of 100 of them. And then I'd put my ballot back in the little privacy envelope. And I don't know how they do it in other states, but in Colorado, you, the voter, put your ballot into the machine and you got the little green light so that you knew your ballot had been counted. And then your ballot went in to be collected with all of the others so that if there was the need for the recount, the physical paper ballot was still there. Every step of the way, trust is engendered on both sides of that transaction. Both sides, not just for the voter, but for the local officials as well. And you knew that paper ballot was the backup in case there was something wrong. Things go wrong sometimes. Machines fail, whatever. Now, everybody gets a ballot in the mail. And not only that, I've gotten ballots for the people who used to live here. So is somebody at my old address getting a ballot with my name on it? Is somebody getting a ballot with my wife's name on it at my old house? I don't know. I have no way to know. Trust has been broken. And so now, even if everything is legit and running smoothly, there's still that nagging doubt because I don't know, I can't see the process. Trust is broken. And if you don't have trust, you can't have integrity. And without integrity, you don't have a democratic republic anymore. But bringing this back to Los Angeles, I'm reminded of something another conservative writer wrote a while ago now. I can't remember who to give credit to, but his statement was, when you watch people in these badly run cities voting Democrat year after year after year after year, maybe we just have to accept the fact that this is how they like things.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
afraid that's where Los Angeles is, Bill. And worse than trust, I think this is what they like.
Well, it's certainly what some people like, and it's certainly where the money is. Scott, I think the three of us all agree on one thing, and this is going to be self-evident to members of our audience, and going to sound just like the highest form of foolishness to people on the other side of the aisle. But I would rather lose an election that I believed was a fair election than win an election that I didn't think was fair.
Yes.
That's self-evident to me. But most people on the left would look at that as just a insipid and naive, dropping of power. You were talking on our backstage show about the fact that this election has caused some national attention for people you would not perhaps expect it from. New York Times, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Talking about the fact that the state of California, the fifth biggest economy in the world, is unable to come up with a vote count for a week or so after an election. Steve mentioned that voting by mail means you can get ballots and send in as many as you want. You don't need to send in an ID when you mail your vote in. By the way, James Woods, who's becoming really a real powerhouse on X, tongue-in-cheek said, it's against the law for election officials to ask for your ID in LA County. It's against the law it's not against the law for you to vote without an ID. It's against the law for them to ask you for your ID. So James Wood said, sure would be a shame if every conservative from the surrounding states were to drive into Los Angeles for an afternoon and just pull up and vote because they're not allowed to check your IDs. But when you have that kind of gap and you have as much time as you need to find the votes, right? If you don't get the answer on election night or the day after, 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 if it's an open-ended thing, then what do you expect the outcome would be? What did the New York Times have to say about that?
So the New York Times was outraged. The editorial board actually wrote this op-ed piece talking about how pathetic and terrible it is that California couldn't get the votes counted 3 days after the election. Just to give our viewers who don't live in California some sense, 3 days after the election, 40% of the ballots were still unreported. 7 days after the election, there were still 15% of the ballots that they didn't have a result for. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon for California. Going back to like 2015, it used to be required for mail-in ballots that they arrive by Election Day. but they changed the law, and they said they can arrive within 7 days of Election Day. So I think Bill and Steve have done an excellent job, because most of the thoughts and allegations of corruption are things that are hard to, if not impossible to prove. But California, by not promptly counting the ballots, has sown the seeds of distrust, has basically made people who are already skeptical of government say, hey, wait a minute, how could it possibly be taking so long? Now, I happen to have run for office a couple of times, and I've sat through election nights where I was on the ballot. And there were times when I had a consultant tell me one night, he's like, this is it, you're toast. And I said, I'm not toast. Look, I'm leading. And it's like, everything's going great. And he goes, let me show you. So he takes me aside and he shows me the precincts. And he goes, this isn't in yet, this isn't in yet, this isn't in yet, this isn't in yet. All of those are going to go like 2-1 against you. You're toast. And he was right. Now, the problem with ballots is ballots from California don't all trickle in equally from all over the state. Just like every other state, they come in chunks. And the mail-in ballots have to be counted in chunks. And so you've got this disequilibrium of the flow of the ballots coming in. And so if you're, like on election night when President Trump says the election was stolen from him, you've got a lot of votes coming in from one area, and then all of a sudden a bunch of votes coming in from somewhere else. And that counterbalances that. So I'm not making allegations of corruption or that votes were stolen or that votes were hidden or anything like that. But I think California is hurting itself by not being able to do something that all the other major states and most of the minor states have been able to pull off with no difficulty. Going back to, it was 7 days afterward, and apparently, according to the New York Times, the state also uses what they call a burdensome process for confirming voters' signatures, which apparently slows them down. But states that tabulate results quickly have elections that are neither less accurate nor less accessible than California. Now, the New York Times solution is we should have national laws that mandate how elections are carried out. Now, that, of course, always makes me bristle. I don't want any national laws affecting how elections are canceled out. And frankly, if you want to live in California where they, if they want to stretch that to 30 days after the election, do whatever you want. You're just hurting yourself. But the New York Times
season.
Yeah, the New York Times, it's, Ramadan election. Democrats, the New York Times says, are defending the indefensible in California. And I love this last line because they point out that California used to be like most of the other states. They used to get the job done on time. The last sentence of the Times editorial bill says, it is time for California to catch up to its own past.
Nice.
There are two hopeful signs that I saw here in this election that I actually had a bit of an emotional stake in. First of all, let me tell you one of the pieces of good news, and that was the actual process itself. We went down to the voting precinct. We looked in. There were no lines at all, none. There were people waiting for us, which was how you should run an election. And while we were standing outside the door, we could see that they were electronic voting machines. I said, oh, great, here we go. But this is what happened. I went to my table. Natasha went to her table. I went to the person. They tried to find my ballot. They couldn't find it. They asked me for my name and address, my zip code many times. Didn't show up. They didn't just hand me a ballot. They couldn't find it. They couldn't find it because for some reason or another, it hadn't been updated for 11 years or something. And I had to remember an address where I was living 11 years ago. Were you at this address? And I said, that was the address. And here's my number. And here's the name. So then they found my name. And then they gave me a ballot, which increased my confidence. They didn't just chuck ballots at me. But the thing that really did impress me really quite a lot was they gave me a big card. It was a piece of paper, but it was very heavy paper. And I went to the voting booth. I inserted this big heavy piece of paper into a machine that ate it. And then I electronically selected the names that I wanted. And when I was finished done, I reviewed the names and the votes and all the ballots I cast. And I hit a button, and this thing printed out a ballot with my name and all of the decisions that I had made on paper. on paper. I voted for this person. You voted for yes, all the way down with the whole things. And then I took this. I could have put it back into the thing, and it would have read it and kept it. But I took it to another station, like 7 stations down, and inserted my ballot into that reader, which tells me it's actually counting something because the electronics are not connected to the reading. Is that making sense to you guys? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It printed out a paper ballot, a big paper ballot that was readable, wasn't barcodes. You voted for these people. Is this what you want? Yes. And then I went 6 stores down and I stuck it into that reader because that way it's not connecting the electronic vote to whether or not it should be counted. It makes sense if you study higher math, as I often do. That raised my confidence. The second thing that raised my confidence was the Pratt campaign itself, which was an absolute grassroots campaign where people who had had enough of the government really started, and he picked up tremendous momentum. Spencer Pratt is not a politician. Spencer Pratt may not have been the ideal person to run the city the size of Los Angeles. You could probably make a compelling case that Spencer Pratt may not have had the slightest idea of how to run a city the size of Los Angeles. But the reason he got as many votes in the last few days as he did was because Spencer Pratt may be completely awful at running a city, but he's not going to be any worse than the mayor who let the city burn down, forced my wife to leave town out of fear of burning alive, and watched as the city that was under her care basically turned to cinders. The reason Spencer Pratt had such a big rush at the end of it was due to the fact that he started doing AI video commercials. And the first ones were really pretty awful, and they got better. And the thing that was most telling to me was that people were doing these AI commercials were not part of the Spencer Pratt campaign. I don't believe the Pratt campaign ever did an AI commercial. I did one, though. And Spencer Pratt, on his campaign paraphernalia, used the hummingbird as his as his avatar, because after being a reality TV star, Spencer Pratt just went back to being a nobody. And Spencer Pratt got a lot of YouTube views because he would stand at his home in Pacific Palisades and he would just have handfuls of sugar water, and he'd be mobbed by hummingbirds. There just 20 of them. He would just hand feed them all. And all of these adorable, beautiful birds got burned to cinders because Karen Bass didn't fill up the water reserves because she didn't care enough to do her job. So I'm just going to close with my entry in the Spencer Pratt campaign, the Hummingbird campaign. And I heard on our backstage show, which we recorded just half an hour ago, that Pratt is leaving Los Angeles, going to Texas, where he'll be a free man, apparently. I don't blame him one bit.
I'm saying we're welcoming here in Texas. He said he was leaving Los Angeles.
Well, I don't blame him one bit. Not because he lost the election, but because of how the election was lost. But the fact that enough Angelenos were ready to try anything, because that's what Spencer Pratt was. He was the anything but candidate. And he had a big, strong rally, forced the first runoff election in 20 years. And that tells me that the people who were angry before about the fires and angry about the corruption and angry about this and angry about that, when they saw how flagrant this was and how utterly predictable, I think they're going to be a little bit angrier next time. And as they say in the poster, the beatings will continue until morale improves. But I am seeing for the first time in my time out here since 1988, I am seeing an LA population and a California population that is no longer able to square what they want to believe with what is actually being delivered to them for the price. And that gives me some hope for the future. And when I say the future, I mean the 2300s. Everybody, thanks very much for joining us. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and we'll see you next time right here on Right Angle.
on now. Get